HHMI team members know the statistics better than I do. We've done some surveys, but we do have some data on, and Ginger, you might be able to speak to the numbers on the 211 satisfaction. I don't know them off the top of my head. You looked at them. Okay. But, so we knew that students were sort of losing interest in STEM following these classes. We saw there's some number that would do to Orgo 1 and not continue on to Orgo 2 lab. And we were, from what, sort of the way the project got started was we really weren't engaging them in the real world applications of organic chemistry. You know, they'd come out and they knew how to do whatever techniques we had taught them, but they didn't see the connections, I think, and so we really approached this with trying to get them engaged, trying to get them to understand how this science applies to the real world. And some, you know, a large fraction, I think, are in there because they're pre-med, pre-vet, pre-dental, and so they have to be there, but we want to make it interesting for them. We want them to be engaged and excited about chemistry and maybe get more chemistry majors, keep them in chemistry or biochem, or, you know, not necessarily lose them, and then some number left STEM completely after this class, and can we minimize those numbers and make it interesting? That was sort of the motivation for how we started.
And then I think similar, the broader motivations
were
the same for us. I mean, just in terms of a simplest measure, the course satisfactions were not great for the students. So, you know, everything's on a 7-point scale at MIT. You know, if you've got
it's going to be better than 5.
Yeah, if you've got like a 6, it's like, wow, students are appreciating this course. And it was like, we were like it was like 4s, you know, so it was like, okay, there's like neutral feelings net. So I think that was part of the motivation, but also just the opportunity of the richness, like, and to, I think part of it minimize some of the troubleshooting issues you always seem to have in labs, to connect it more to research that the teaching assistants might be familiar with. So there was, I think, discussions over years sort of for I mean, in our case, which is very different. I love this idea of doing it by pieces. I think it can be more intentional in that way, but this was an overhaul that MIT was doing at the time, kind of based on the numbers, and then also seeing this opportunity to make these connections. Where I think it had, you know, I mean, this was like 8 years ago, and I feel like there's just been an explosion around that time in the sense then of recognizing the importance of making these connections for students and helping them make the connections themselves.
Yeah, so you know, there were a number of different things. I guess when I teach lab, I like to walk through and talk to the students and listen in to what they're saying, what they're talking to their graduate students about. And but there was probably one single moment that I always think about when I was lecturing in the big lecture hall, and I had just gone over a mechanism, and I was going into the workup, and a student asked a question that made it clear that they couldn't tell the difference between the mechanism and a scheme and then what was happening in the workup. They're just envisioning it all happening in the same class, or, you know, they just didn't make that connection. And so that's when I realized, you know, we're not doing anything, we're presenting a mechanism in the lecture, and then they go to lab and they follow a procedure, and there's no motivation at all for them to really think about the mechanism or even the workup and what's happening on a molecular level compared to what they're observing. So to me, that was a really core disconnect that needed to be fixed. So the way that I knew that I was successful, the first moment that I really knew that what we had been trying was working, was when I was walking through the lab, and a group of 3 students came up to me, very excited about what they were doing, and saying, you know, we just realized that our reagent isn't going to be soluble in the solvent that we wanted to use, and, you know, we were trying to recalculate the concentration, and it's not working out right, and why does concentration matter? So here they were directing themselves, they were pointing themselves towards content in a way that didn't happen before. So to me, that was the real success, despite all the other measures that I had done outside of that.
Another question? Yeah.
How is going to work with the grading part? You know, because these are going to be non-traditional labs, so I'm guessing there will be non-traditional grading. Or how is that going to work out?
Same question for all of us.
Oh, okay.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. So the students will be going through the process of the actual synthesis, and then in terms of characterization of molecules, the current setup with this lab is that a graduate student will take either student samples in a small sample size like the summer course, or possibly representative samples from the larger course of the different combinations and permutations of reagents used, and then do scanning electron microscopy and powder X-ray diffraction. And then students would be presented images from SEM and be able to write up, so basically the second week, they would be given the data sets and with a little prompt about, different particle size influences properties. Can we see a difference in our, in the specific, run that we did, and then compare your data with a neighbor's data, with class neighbor's data. What types of trends can we start to see? Kind of keeping that a more open-ended question. And so it would be less looking for a specific right answer, 100% you should always use these conditions, but rather we are noticing that there are different things going on. We can see that the changes that we make on the kind of large scale are reflected on this very small scale, and then hopefully with images and X-ray to back that up. And then just asking for students to come up with a reasonable explanation of their observations and carry forward from there.
So we've essentially moved to, well, there's a number of things that we do that you would see in a traditional course. So we have quizzes. So there's those things. But the thing that I would think is most different is the writing that they do. So we don't do traditional lab reports. As a group, they submit a collaborative writing assignment, which is basically communicating their experimental design. This is our solution. This is how we're going to implement it. This is the data or this is what the data should tell us if what we're proposing is, or our hypothesis is valid. And then there's a second writing assignment that comes after the experiment that's individual, and that's more about reflecting on what they've done. So does the data I collected support the hypothesis? And that sort of thing. But the key there is that the grading has nothing to do with whether or not they even were successful in getting a product, right? So we encourage them, if you didn't get a product, well, you have something. You still have something in that flask. It might be a side product, it might be your starting material that's unreacted and that sort of thing. But they should have something to talk about even if they didn't have a product, so that they're not going to be penalized. And then we have rubrics that we spend a lot of time training the graduate students how to apply those rubrics in the grading so that there's reliability in the grading across the course. But really more important than that is getting the message across in every way that we can that you're not going to be penalized. We want you to explore that that's what it should be about. You're not going to be penalized. So it's more about being able to talk about what you did do and based on things that you should know, that kind of thing.
And in many ways, we have a similar process where there's extensive rubrics that are related to certain discussions that they're expected to be writing up in their reports that show that they understand the process, why they use the technique, why they applied that, what they expected to see, what they did see, what that data meant. They also do analysis in the class of other people's findings, as in published findings of crystal structures and things that they can analyze from that. And then actually, this course is also a writing intensive course. MIT has a certain number of required writing intensive courses. So they do a lot of writing in this course, including a literature review on recent literature on a different topic of their choice, where we're just like in our lab where we're taking what could be seen as a medical issue and looking at it from a molecular standpoint. They do a similar thing with a topic of their choice. So none of their grade comes from, did your protein express well, did everything work perfectly, did your mutation work that you picked? And though we did find it was important to put a real percentage of their grade on their work in the lab, which again by rubric was evaluated by their teaching assistants and training the teaching assistants to know how to follow that rubric.
So a lot of the previous answers are reflected in what we're doing. So yeah, they will have pre-lab worksheets which are graded, they will have notebook pages that are collected that we're gonna have them write sort of reflection questions in at the end of the day. It might be a challenge question. And we are also going to incorporate some writing, but they're going to be non-traditional writing assignments. They're going to actually write a letter home. It could be in the form of an email, but it's essentially writing, you think of it as writing for a lay audience, but you have to explain to your mom, your grandma, your aunt, your uncle, whoever, what you did, what your results were, so that it's accessible. And it really makes them, they can't just basically copy the procedure from their handout. They have to be able to explain it to, to someone who is not in the science field. And then they're also going to do an argument-driven writing assignment, which is, I think, sort of similar to what Ginger was talking about, which is basically, what did I get and how do I know? What's my one piece of data or my several, what is my answer and how do I know that's what it is? And it's going to be one page, you have to be concise, but make your point compellingly. And so that's basically how, and then they're also going to be evaluated not for their performance lab, but for their participation in the discussions. Did they put an effort? And that's also, as Beth and Ginger said, evaluated by the GSIs who are in the labs with them.
And actually, that just reminded me to add to that when you say the participation in the labs. It's also really important to think about, to think about how to put in the rubric that you're not making a difference between extroverts and introverts, and that you can be, because sometimes that then really gets students stressed out, a certain subset of students, that it's really also clear to the students how you can be a productive member, which doesn't always mean just like answering every question and different ways that you're participating, which does involve answering some questions to the group, but just making it clear what that participation means.
I think very similar to what you were talking about.
So for microfluidics labs, basically, most of our job is done on reforming the fabrication process, but ultimately this is a quantification lab. So they will have to do analysis on the channel, the liquid that they flow into the channel, and watch any of the laminar flow or tubular flow, any mixing of the liquids or not. So essentially we are focusing on the analysis. So the lab report is more closely to the traditional write-ups that you were thinking about, talking about analysis, the observation, and comments. So we don't judge them by how they prepare the mold and chips. And then what we want is for them to make a connection with modern technology like microfluidics to the more traditional analytical tools like UV-vis or fluorometer, UV spectroscopy, things like that. So if you come to the lab later, you will know how we actually incorporating the analysis part into microfluidics lab, and then how they're going to get some useful data, analytical data from those. So we actually grade them based on the data and the comments and how they're able to make a connection, or if it's not as what they expected, how what went wrong, and able to do the analysis.
Yeah, one more.
So as you integrate more research into the laboratory setting, how do you prepare GSIs from very different backgrounds who might not have experience with that specific type of chemistry? So if you have a computational chemist teaching or a biochemist teaching organic chemistry, they probably don't have practical experience in an organic chemistry research lab. What does that look like to prepare those GSIs, on all the GSIs, to have kind of, so that students get an equal experience?
Yes, I'll start first. So for our lab, it's an analytical lab. So basically, the GSI has to be familiar with all the instruments and techniques that they use in the lab. So before the lab starts, how the lab works is the GSI will be briefed maybe 15 to 20 minutes beforehand to train them how to use the instruments. So for this microfluidics lab particularly, for the semester that we started implemented, we try to spend about 20 minutes for the GSI so that they can get an idea and hands-on work, and they do it themselves, so they know what will go wrong, and so they can translate the information better when they are in the class. But I will be really interested to know how they do, because since they have so many different experiments for all the GSIs, so
Larry, a question too.
So it's gonna be a new experience for us, but as I talked about before, we are concerned about the GSI variability, but we are planning to do specific GSI training for 211 that does address these challenges and try to think about ways in which, especially our second week is guided and scaffolded enough for the on the GSI side that we hope to like mitigate some of those challenges. But basically we have to do extra training for the GSIs, like very specific to 211.
Yeah, so it's actually, we kind of employ a combination of those two things. So first of all, you're only assigned, like an organic graduate student would not be assigned to the biochem lab. You are assigned to the lab that you have supposed expertise in. But that said, it's first year graduate students that are TAing, so they have a whole range of different actual backgrounds, including some that might have done, for our lab, no biochemistry research, but they switch into that because that's what they're going to do for their graduate work. So they actually are learning this along with the students. So the lab TAs actually do get a week of TA training specific for the labs, or maybe it's 4 days, where they are supposed to, as well as they can, depending on how long the actual lab is, run through everything. And then there's also general TA training that addresses some of the more, general issues that they'll come across. So it is, that's a time-intensive model for sure, but that's what's done year to year. There's a week, but MIT has a January term where there's no classes, so for fall things, they come a week early in the summer, and for the spring term, they do a week during that non-term of classes.
So I guess there's for the two classes. For the upper level class, the professor who teaches it uses graduate students that work in his lab. So there's not an issue there really in terms of them understanding the chemistry. For the Orgo 2 lab, I would say, because it's such a large course, and it requires a lot of graduate students to teach it, many of them are not organic. And that was a problem before the curriculum, and it does remain a continuing challenge for us. So we've been trying, one of the ways we've been trying to address that is during the weekly staff meeting. So most of that has been dealing with trying to get them to adapt this approach of teaching that allows for not giving the right answer, but helping the students get to the right answer on their own. In terms of the chemistry itself, some of the things we've tried, at least early on in the term, most of the anxiety for new or non-organic graduate students can be remediated by just opening up the labs to them for the first couple of weeks for a few hours, so they can go in and try some of the first experiments all the way through and get the hang of it.
So to echo some of the sentiments that have been said previously, so first off, increasing graduate student training is also an ongoing project in the department kind of as a whole. We also are looking at staff meetings as being really good instructional time, so there's an existing 125 staff meeting to ensure this was particularly, or for this lab would be particularly relevant for the grading of the responses from students at the end, because the lab itself was chosen primarily as a precipitation kind of dump and stir lab, so a lot less technical on that side. And then also Professor Poniatowski, who's currently in charge of 125. So for those of you who are coming to this afternoon session A, you will get a chance to meet him briefly. He's teaching currently in our spring term, so he'll be there very briefly. And he's also working on generating a GSI kind of handbook supplement to go along with, just give a brief rundown for each experiment so that then that can be carried forward and make that process easier.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point to mention. Like we have the handbook or instructions that the students get for everyone, and then the TAs get a different one. That's one level. And actually, one thing I wish that I had done was then make one for whoever the instructor is. Yeah. But so you're already thinking about that, which is amazing. Try.
Yeah. That actually speaks, what you just said speaks to the complexity that hasn't been brought up that I want to bring up and put on the table. And it's a question that derives from being old. And it's the question of sustainability. So, you know, the question of how does an innovation survive the innovator is really critical, because in our own department, some of the dissatisfactory designs that are being changed and reformed didn't exist when those courses were first put into place. But over the years, I always call it the year 2 problem. I'll be optimistic and call it the year 5 problem. Over time, those very interesting things start to become a pain in the ass, as what was exciting and so forth just becomes burdensome because you're facing the same really severely challenging problems from year to year. And if you're going to integrate research, at some point the research gets done, and it becomes part of the community of the campus to sort of know that the answer is there. So how do you create a system that can sustain the energy of that reform? And without going into details, I can give you some alarmingly good examples about how really interesting ideas, when handed off to someone else, or even the same person being in it 5 years later, it just gets tiresome. So right now, you're all young and vibrant and excited about the idea that you're looking to implement. But 5 years from now and 10 years from now, how can you think about, or can you think about designing ways to keep that sort of effort sustained?
Well, I think I can actually speak to that, because we're kind of like, 2008 was the first year, so I don't know, we're getting there. We're getting older. So I haven't actually really been involved in these labs since 2009, and actually that we are running into that issue, I feel, in the labs. I feel like directions I thought that would naturally happen, extensions that would naturally happen, haven't happened, and it's just like, why would it be so easy, just, you know, take these meetings everyone's made, now we should be expressing these up, and they don't. And actually just hearing last night at dinner, talking to several people that were involved in the FFGSI program, I feel like that's a rich opportunity for that, which actually will definitely be bringing those suggestions back to MIT, because I think you need someone invested in it, if not every year, beyond just running it, beyond just you're now assigned to it to run it every 3 years maybe, and just to make it cool again, and because you know, there is going to be, the research is going to go on, and just, it's not, once something is scaffolded well in place, it seems like it should not be so difficult to just bring that new stuff in and update it or fix whatever awful problem or replace that one thing that's just the pain. But you need there needs to be someone invested in it, and I think we have this false impression sometimes that the graduate students who are running the lab can make these little changes, but it takes so much time that unless it's actually part of your job to be updating it, I know that doesn't seem to happen.
Yeah, in terms of sustainability of the protocol that we have, so one of the advantages I mentioned is the combinatorial aspect, so you can start moving away from the specific 2 metals and 4 templates that are chosen currently to other combinations. There's also the idea, that's the, I guess, the cop-out answer, which is that as scientists we must always be ready to evolve and change based on the technology that rises, and so what was innovative 50 years ago is no longer seen as particularly innovative now. One of the
so maybe the goal is not even if this lab lasts 15 years, but every 5 years.
Granted, that said, one avenue that has been suggested by Professor Bonitaski when I was speaking with him is to have a collection of labs that can be chosen, a menu that could be chosen a la carte, essentially, each term, where you would have established sets of labs that you could then pick, 12 of 23 or whatever each term. That's a lot of work. That's an incredible challenge. That may not be totally feasible, but that would be a way that you could rotate in and out experiments so that if your average student is in college for 4 years, you can have enough turnover that their roommate isn't always just going to say, here's the answer.
We've talked about that too with our 3-week modules, and so if we're doing a module that focuses on the techniques highlighted are like, let's just say like TLC and liquid extraction, they're learning about, you know, electrophilic aromatic substitution, whatever it is, that the labs would be different, but the techniques highlighted would be the same, but like Jordan said, we sort of have a menu and you can swap the modules in and out, but again, developing these 3-week modules is a lot of work, so.
And fraternities hold on to things for a very
They
long
do.
time. So there might be more than just a couple of years.
Right, exactly.
So basically for only designing one lab, I think for my standpoint of it, I always think this process is a dynamic process. It's always changing. It will change. After we left, the microfluidics team left, the new GSI that's going to teach the class will see when they try to do the experiment for themselves, they will see that, oh, there's something that we can change and make it even better. And for our case, we embrace that change and we encourage them actually to make the lab even more accessible for undergraduate students. So that's just more my case.
So I would say even, you know, year 2, we have 3 problem-based experiments that are multi-week experiments that we've been using, and it's only the 2nd year, and already you can tell that there's sort of starting to get stale. And so I guess in a similar way, you know, there's multiple types of problems, and then of course there's a whole list of reaction types that we can apply them to. So developing a set that, you know, that can be rotated through in a way. And then I think the other important thing that has to happen in a sort of is thinking more about getting the students to identify a problem that they want to pursue, and maybe bringing that in some way in the course. And so that's where we're moving with that.
Yeah. Not part of the panel. I teach at Showing Hayes. I teach at the university. We look at our labs and try to make revisions periodically. And one of the things we think that to address the question raised is that you really have to have an organizational attitude of continuous improvement. And because nothing you do is ever going to be permanent. It's got to be, you know, there's going to be adjustments. You're going to find the problems that show up that you want to improve, or your techniques are changed, or something's going to happen that you're going to want to do differently. An opportunity comes up you want to incorporate. And so what we're trying to do is get in the habit of having the faculty get together at the end of the academic year and sit down and say, okay, collectively as a group, what are we dissatisfied with, what do we want to change, what's broken, what needs to be fixed. That you're not biting up a whole thing at once. If you're doing it a little bit, like one experiment at a time, like fluidics, or one part of an experiment, or one technique being substituted, you can do it gradually, but you have to have that whole, you know, kind of organizational idea or culture that says we want to continue to work on these things and not let them get stale.
I can add to that. I think also pointing to the FFGSI program here, I think that's going to become one really powerful way to make sure that things stay fresh and progressing forward. Because yeah, there has to be somebody who's doing some of the groundwork, and so not only are we providing graduate students with the opportunity to get their feet wet, but we're also improving the courses while we do it.